life was like a box of chocolates.
Life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. Forrest Gump wasn't just a sentimental drama about an unlikely hero. It was a technical gamble, a production battlefield, and a cultural juggernaut. What audiences saw as a heartfelt story about one man's journey was, behind the camera, a series of chaotic experiments, risky stunts, experimental CGI, and heated studio debates. From Tom Hanks refusing to take a paycheck up front to groundbreaking effects that fooled even critics, this film became a perfect storm of art, commerce, and pure luck. Today, we're pulling back the curtain with 20 weird facts about Forrest Gump, and wait until you hear the mysterious bonus fact at the end, which even die-hard fans don't know. Let's dive in. Tom Hanks didn't take a salary. Tom Hanks didn't sign on for Forrest Gump with a traditional actor's salary. Instead, he negotiated a back-end deal, agreeing to take a percentage of the profits rather than an upfront paycheck. It wasn't just a gamble, it was a masterstroke. Paramount was nervous about the film's unusual tone and unpredictable box office future, so they gladly agreed. What happened next stunned everyone. The movie grossed over $678 million worldwide. Hanks's decision netted him an estimated $40 million, far more than any flat fee could have earned him. This wasn't just smart, it redefined Hollywood contract negotiations. What audiences didn't see was that Hanks believed so strongly in the film that he literally bet his fortune on it. And the gamble paid off, cementing his status as not just a star, but a Hollywood power player. The running scenes nearly bankrupted production. When Forrest Gump runs across America, it looks poetic and effortless. But in reality, those sequences nearly bankrupted the movie. Paramount refused to fund the cross-country shoot. That's when director Robert Zemeckis and Tom Hanks stepped in. They personally paid for the entire running montage out of their own pockets. Shooting in multiple states, under brutal weather conditions, was a logistical nightmare. Hanks later said, "We just wanted to finish it. We believed in it that much." Imagine that, a scene audiences now quote endlessly only exists because the star and director wrote checks themselves. Not studio cash, but personal money. Without their intervention, Forrest might never have taken that legendary jog across the American landscape. Forrest's accent came from a child actor. Tom Hanks's now iconic drawl, slow, sweet, unmistakable, didn't come from his imagination. It came from a child, specifically Michael Connor Humphreys, the young actor who played Forrest as a boy. Humphreys spoke with a thick Mississippi accent that was so unique, Zemeckis suggested Hanks mirror it. Hanks didn't just imitate it, he built the entire character around it. That's why his voice feels so authentic, so lived in. The irony? Humphreys struggled to continue acting after the film because casting directors thought his accent was too strong. What audiences didn't know was that one boy's real way of speaking shaped one of the most famous performances in Hollywood history. Not an acting choice, not a dialect coach, just a kid's natural speech forever woven into cinema. The ping-pong scenes were fake, but revolutionary. Forrest's ping-pong skills look real enough to impress Olympic champions. But here's the secret. Tom Hanks never hit a single ball. Every ping-pong scene used early digital trickery. The ball was completely computer-generated, making it one of the first films to use CGI for such subtle realism. Hanks and his opponents simply mimed the motions, swinging paddles at empty air. Later, digital artists animated the ball to match the rhythm. What seems like Hanks's flawless athleticism is actually a technical illusion. It wasn't just a trick. It was a revolution in film technology. Quiet, seamless, and way ahead of its time. Without it, the movie couldn't have delivered Forrest's uncanny, lightning-fast reflexes. What audiences didn't know? They were witnessing CGI history, disguised as a casual sports montage. The Vietnam sequences were filmed in South Carolina. The brutal Vietnam War sequences didn't happen anywhere near Asia. They were filmed in the United States, on a golf course in South Carolina. The lush greenery was transformed into a jungle battlefield through careful set dressing and digital wizardry. What looked like endless rice paddies and treacherous terrain was actually a manicured course altered with imported palm trees and post-production effects. Zemeckis and his team combined practical smoke machines, mud pits, and digital skies to sell the illusion. For extras, the production relied heavily on local recruits and veterans. The deception was so convincing that audiences swore they were seeing Southeast Asia. It wasn't a war zone, it was a golf course, not Vietnam, but South Carolina. Proof that movie magic can turn a peaceful American landscape into the chaos of combat. Bubba's shrimp legacy became real. In the movie, Forrest and Bubba dream of starting a shrimping business. What began as a fictional subplot turned into a real-world empire. After the film's release, the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company was launched in 1996. It wasn't a throwaway gimmick. It became a full-scale restaurant chain with dozens of locations worldwide. Tourists lined up to eat seafood inspired by a movie character. The company even decorated menus with Forrest quotes and film memorabilia. Not many films spawn actual businesses that thrive decades later, but Forrest Gump did. What audiences didn't know was that Bubba's dream didn't just end on screen. It came alive in neon signs, fried shrimp baskets, and souvenir shop merchandise. A throwaway line about shrimping evolved into a global seafood franchise, blurring the line between cinema fantasy and commercial. Reality Robin Wright filmed while sick. Jenny's haunting performances weren't just acting, they were forged under physical strain. Robin Wright shot several of her most emotional scenes while battling a severe cold and fever. Instead of postponing production, Wright pushed through. Her frailty added a raw, fragile texture that deepened Jenny's tragic arc. The famous scene where she sings "Blowin' in the Wind" on stage? She was running a fever. The scene of Jenny collapsing in the field? She was visibly weak, but Zemeckis kept the camera rolling. Wright's exhaustion translated into authenticity. What audiences didn't realize was that her sickness gave Jenny's downfall an eerie realism. It wasn't Hollywood makeup. It was human vulnerability captured on film, not staged fragility, but actual physical suffering immortalized in celluloid. Elvis Presley's voice came from a sound alike. In one of the film's cleverest cameos, a young Elvis Presley teaches Forrest how to dance. But the real Presley had been gone for years. Instead, the production used archive references and hired Kurt Russell to provide the voice. Yes, the same Kurt Russell who once portrayed Elvis in a TV movie. His impersonation was so uncanny that many viewers assumed it was a Presley recording. What looked like a fleeting, playful cameo was actually an audio performance buried under digital trickery. It wasn't Elvis. It was Russell's secret contribution, one that went uncredited. What audiences didn't know? The King's presence in Forrest Gump was conjured not by old tape machines, but by the uncanny mimicry of a Hollywood star who once stepped into Presley's shoes for real. The bench became a tourist magnet. Forrest's simple act of waiting on a bench with a box of chocolates became a cinematic icon. But the bench itself? It wasn't in the middle of Savannah's Chippewa Square at all. It was a movie prop. The production built it specifically for the scene, then removed it after filming. Yet the image of Forrest sitting there became so powerful that tourists flooded Savannah looking for it. Today, the bench sits in a museum, preserved as a piece of film history. Still, fans continue to flock to the square, often sitting on random benches to recreate the moment. It wasn't just a piece of set design. It became a pilgrimage site, not wood and paint, but a cultural landmark that turned a quiet southern square into an international destination. Hanks filmed with a 103-degree fever. One of the most famous moments in Forrest Gump is when Forrest gives his speech at the Washington Monument rally. Here's the twist. Tom Hanks filmed that entire sequence while running a 103-degree fever. The exhaustion, the sweat, the dazed expression. They weren't acting choices. They were symptoms. He later admitted that he barely remembered filming the day. Yet the scene became one of the movie's most memorable, with Forrest's words drowned out by audio interference. What audiences didn't know was that Hanks was literally burning up while portraying Forrest's big moment. His real physical struggle gave the scene an authenticity no script could write. And before we move to the next fact, go ahead and like and subscribe, because what's coming next will make you question everything you thought you knew about this film. The Watergate scene was a last-minute addition. The moment Forrest innocently reports the Watergate break-in feels like destiny. But here's the secret. It was almost never filmed. Robert Zemeckis added it at the very last minute, after realizing the timeline allowed Forrest to stumble into history once again. The crew used a hotel facade in Los Angeles, not Washington, D.C., and projected lights into an office window to simulate burglars with flashlights. Hanks's delivery was completely improvised. He just rambled into the phone like Forrest would. The scene wasn't just funny. It tied the character into one of America's darkest scandals in a deceptively casual way. What audiences didn't know? A spur-of-the-moment decision created one of the sharpest satirical stings in the film. Not pre-planned satire, but lightning caught at the end of a shooting schedule. CGI legs fooled everyone. Gary Sinise's portrayal of Lieutenant Dan, the bitter veteran who loses his legs, shocked audiences with its realism. But the secret wasn't prosthetics. It was groundbreaking CGI. Sinise wore blue fabric over his lower legs during filming. Digital artists then painstakingly erased them in post-production, frame by frame, sometimes layering in period-accurate furniture to cover the gaps. In 1994, this was cutting-edge visual effects. Critics praised Sinise's performance, unaware that an invisible army of computer artists worked just as hard to sell the illusion. What audiences didn't realize? Lieutenant Dan's anguish was real, but his injuries were a digital ghost, a haunting collaboration between acting and technology that forever changed how Hollywood used CGI for drama, not just spectacle. The feather was pure movie magic. The movie opens and closes with a delicate feather drifting through the air, a visual metaphor for chance and destiny. But that shot wasn't easy. It took weeks to capture. The feather was partly real, partly digital. Zemeckis filmed a real feather in controlled air currents, then enhanced its path with CGI to make it dance gracefully around landmarks before landing at Forrest's feet. The simplicity was deceptive. Coordinating airflow, camera movement, and lighting was brutally technical. What looks effortless is actually a carefully engineered illusion. Not a random feather, but a blend of nature and technology symbolizing fate. What audiences didn't know was that one of cinema's most poetic opening shots was built from scientific precision and digital wizardry. Not luck. Hanks ran through blisters and blood. The cross-country. Running scenes tested Tom Hanks in brutal ways. He wasn't just jogging for the camera. He was pounding through miles of real terrain under heavy costumes and wigs. The result? Blisters, swollen ankles, and even bloodied feet. Production assistants recalled him limping between takes, but Hanks refused to stop. He insisted Forrest's journey had to look authentic. The painful commitment gave the scenes their raw energy. When Forrest looks exhausted but determined, that's not acting. That's Hanks physically breaking down. What audiences didn't know was that behind the beauty of sunsets and highways lay an actor who sacrificed his body to make Forrest's improbable odyssey feel like flesh and blood reality. Not running on script pages, but running on sheer grit. The studio didn't believe in the film. Paramount Pictures didn't think Forrest Gump would be a hit. Executives considered it too slow, too strange, too sentimental. They even tried to shut down the production when costs ballooned, especially after Hanks and Zemeckis spent their own money on scenes. Early test screenings confused audiences. Was it a comedy, a tragedy, a political satire? Studio executives panicked. But once released, the film exploded, becoming a box office phenomenon and winning 6 Academy Awards. The irony? A film the studio wanted to abandon became one of their greatest legacies. Not a surefire hit, but a near reject that defied every prediction. What audiences didn't know was how close Forrest Gump came to being left on the cutting room floor of history. Ice cream improvisation became iconic. When Forrest visits Lieutenant Dan in the hospital and cheerfully says, "I got you some ice cream," before plopping a cone into Dan's lap, audiences laughed and cried at the same time. But here's the kicker. That moment wasn't scripted exactly as filmed. Tom Hanks improvised the casual toss of the ice cream, while Gary Sinise reacted in real time. Zemeckis loved the authentic frustration and left it in. The mixture of humor and heartbreak turned the scene into one of the film's most quoted moments. Not choreographed drama, but a spontaneous accident of timing and performance. What audiences didn't know was that a throwaway improvisation captured the essence of Forrest's innocence and Dan's despair better than any carefully planned shot could have. Sally Field played Hanks's mother. Despite age gap, Sally Field played Forrest's loving mother, delivering lines like, "Life is like a box of chocolates with maternal wisdom." But in real life, she was only 10 years older than Tom Hanks. The casting was controversial, but Zemeckis insisted Field could project the warmth and gravity needed. Through makeup, costuming, and her commanding delivery, she transformed into Mrs. Gump. Ironically, just 6 years earlier, Field and Hanks had played love interests in the film Punchline. What audiences didn't realize was that Hollywood makeup and Field's skill concealed one of the smallest parent-child age gaps in major film history. Not generational distance, but sheer performance power created the illusion of motherly authority, cementing Field's role as the heart of the film. Famous lines were almost cut. The most famous line, "Life is like a box of chocolates," nearly didn't make it into the final cut. Early drafts had Forrest delivering it in a different scene, with less impact. Zemeckis almost trimmed it for pacing. But during test screenings, audiences kept repeating the line afterward. Paramount noticed. They realized they had a catchphrase on their hands. The line stayed, and it became the defining quote of the entire movie. What audiences didn't know was how close Forrest came to losing his most enduring piece of wisdom. Not an obvious keeper, but a line saved by random audience reactions, proving that sometimes a film's immortality hinges on the smallest editorial choices. The cross-country runners were real fans. When Forrest runs coast to coast, he's joined by a ragtag group of followers who see him as a kind of prophet. But here's the twist. Many of those extras weren't actors at all. They were real runners recruited during production, including members of running clubs who wanted to be part of movie history. Some logged actual miles alongside Hanks, jogging through heat and dust for hours on end. Their sweat and exhaustion weren't staged. They were real. The authenticity of those sequences comes from true athletes lending their stamina to Forrest's surreal odyssey. What audiences didn't know was that Forrest's fictional marathon tapped into real endurance, blurring the line between scripted cinema and actual physical achievement. Forrest's famous line was delivered by Hanks's brother in one shot. Here's a secret buried deep in production. In one of the running sequences, the wide shot of Forrest jogging wasn't Tom Hanks at all. It was his younger brother Jim Hanks, who doubled for him in several long-distance running shots. The family resemblance was strong enough that no one noticed. Jim later joked that his claim to fame was literally running for his brother. It wasn't stunt doubles or digital trickery. It was blood. What audiences didn't know was that some of the most iconic running images in Forrest Gump came not from Tom himself, but from his brother's endurance. Not star power, but family loyalty helped bring Forrest's epic journey to life. The movie changed how America saw Vietnam veterans. Beyond Oscars and box office, Forrest Gump had a deeper legacy. The portrayal of Lieutenant Dan, broken, angry, but ultimately resilient, shifted public perception of Vietnam veterans. Gary Sinise's raw performance resonated with audiences and led him to dedicate his life to veteran causes. He later founded the Gary Sinise Foundation, supporting wounded soldiers and their families. What started as a supporting role in a fictional story became a lifelong mission to heal real wounds. The bonus twist? A Hollywood role didn't just win awards, it sparked a humanitarian movement that continues today. What audiences didn't know was that Forrest Gump didn't just tell history, it changed it. Forrest Gump wasn't just a movie, it was a gamble, a technological experiment, and a cultural earthquake. What audiences saw as a simple tale of one man's journey was built on improvisation, accidents, financial risks, and groundbreaking effects. And decades later, its legacy continues, in restaurants, in charities, in quotes whispered across generations. If you learned something new today, hit like, share this with a fellow movie lover, and don't forget to subscribe for more hidden Hollywood stories. After all, life really is like a box of chocolates. You never know what secret you'll get next.